is later usually, but it is.
No,
113 articles.
it's not that many.
It's about normal, and how many of them are, an awful lot of them are zoning. Yeah. Which is
Weird.
why, pardon me?
That's odd.
Yeah, isn't it? So, what Brian's here to do with us is to take us through the warrant on the core articles, unless you all have something specific you want to surface. I think there are a couple of big ones. For those of you who, well, if you saw the newspaper today, you know the Board of Selectmen put the Island Home back on the warrant last night. Interesting discussion. So we were originally supposed to talk about that tonight, and now we're going to have to figure out when we're going to talk about it, but it'll probably be later into February, obviously. So that's a big money article. There are a couple of others, and then Brian, maybe you have a flow that you wanted to go through, but I think talking a little bit or setting the stage on this municipal, I'm going to get it wrong. Modernization Act probably will help us understand some of the changes that, if we accept it, will actually, I think, smooth out, make our process faster, easier. So.
I was actually going to, the article that the chairman's referring to for Ireland Home is actually Article 14. It's on page 5. Most of the articles before that are all the standard funding articles that most everybody has seen, if either being a member of the Finance Committee or having gone to a town meeting, so there's not a lot of anything new there. Article 15, the town manager will, at the next meeting that she comes to, will talk to you about the acquisition of the property.
Right, before though, on Article 14.
Yes.
We, the Finance Committee, will get a money number at some point?
Yes, we will, and that'll be included in the motion as an authorization for borrowing, because we do have to put a number in there. And it is contingent upon a 2.5 debt exclusion vote, which would happen at the annual town election.
Okay.
Sewer changes, I think that the Article 24, which is on page 11, is one that is born out of the Municipal Modernization Act. It is, we have to add language for the designation for the use of bond proceeds. We sell all the bonds that we sell when we go to market at premium, which typically cover issuance cost. And so when you have a debt exclusion, you have a couple options that you can use for the premium that you sell them for, net of issuance costs, or the remaining after net of issuance costs. And they, Municipal Modernization Act extended that to all bonds that you sell. So now what we've done, and I'll use the example, we went to market and sold about $37 million of bonds for the school for the project that they have, which generated about $1.9 million in premium. There's about $500,000 of issuance costs. The remaining $1.4 million actually, based on the way the law had been previously structured, was allowed to be applied to the project costs, which ultimately will have the impact of reducing the amount that we actually end up borrowing. What this article will do will designate it to all borrowings that we do. Previously, it was only allowed to be done for debt exclusions. So now it will cover any borrowings that we're authorized to do. And because we have some debt that's been issued or authorized but unissued at this time, we need to do this blanket acceptance so that it will be retroactive to cover all of that debt. I don't think there's anything else. That's just the stabilization trust fund.
Before you go forward, on the, okay, keep going.
Okay, sorry.
Starting with Article 29,
Yep.
30, 31, 32, these are the collective bargaining agreements.
I would anticipate no, but I don't want to jinx the process.
So just so everybody understands, if we don't have an agreement 1 month ahead of town meeting, so that is March 1st.
Yes, that's correct.
Then these articles, even if they come to an agreement March 10th, these articles will not, we, the Finance Committee, will not take any action whatsoever on them. And that's sort of a requirement we put in a couple of years ago as we got jammed basically on the town meeting floor with some bargaining agreement, so 1 month, if not, it just flows over into the next town.
Yep.
Unions are well aware of that, so.
Brian, can I ask you about the Article 25, the ferry embarkation fee?
Sure.
Is this language different from past years?
No. Not that I'm aware
So
of, no.
professional services pertaining to the potential use, reuse of land, buildings, and infrastructure in the vicinity of Nantucket Harbor, that's
I believe
typical?
this is the same language what we have used, yes.
Okay.
And we typically pay for the CSOs with that funding
Right.
downtown.
That's why I thought maybe that was new language with the planning for Harbor
No,
Place.
I believe it's been the same. I'll double check, but I believe it is the same language as we've
I
had.
haven't seen that number yet, but I always ask about the embarkation fee since things were slower now. They're like, I watched a thing the other night where, you know, the amount of people that are taking the boat, is our embarkation fee gone from 180 or whatever it was to
We,
100 by now?
no.
You have those numbers, don't you?
Yeah.
They haven't changed materially. I mean, they're effectively pretty stable. You do see an up and down, but there's a capacity issue. So in reality, there is some stability there.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about embarkation where everybody on the boat pays, say, 50 cents. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But we've changed how many
She-
people are taking the boat.
Yeah, but the town tracks that. That's part of your leading indicator
Yeah.
of tracking. And what Julia's saying is that actually they've stayed relatively flat because there is a capacity challenge.
But to your point, Cliff, the capacity changed this summer. Right.
Okay, but it's changed in the last 5 years, is what I've said.
Well, the capacity hasn't changed.
The number of
Because the
people
boat- the-
carried have, but the capacity hasn't.
The boats can only carry so many people,
We've
All right,
had-
which we've seen.
People that have gone from the airport to the boat, and then I thought, maybe I'm wrong, I'll look, check it again.
I know, I mean, the revenue number has stayed pretty consistent, and it's been, a lot of it is a timing issue too. Don't forget the state, because of that.
I know
that
we
partic-
average, and that's why every year I say,
Yeah.
hey, isn't the number changed? And they say, no, because we average, and I say,
Well,
"Oh,
one of the other
every year
reasons that,
stays the same."
one of the reason that the number stays somewhat consistent too is the fact is that because that is the state is basically the pass-through entity for that. All they do is collect it and then distribute it out. They don't distribute it until it's paid to them. So they're not fronting any, the state's not paying it and then collecting the money. So there could be, one of the things that can happen and why it does stay relatively flat in terms of collections or revenue into the town is that it's all dependent on the timing of the payments from the operators to the state and then remitting it to us. So if there's a lag in that, then we see that lag and then that kind of smooths some of it out or keeps it somewhat flat in terms of the revenue as well. Let's see, CPC you've already done.
On the CPC, I
Yep.
see the 250,600 for the windows is in the same, is in the article.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have to make it,
We're gonna make it part of our motion or something?
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
And before that, on Article 36, surplus equipment disposition, is this standard for how we, I mean, do we have to authorize every enterprise fund when they want to sell a truck?
We have to when it's over when this is between
When it's
25
over
and 35, we do have to get authorization to dispose of surplus equipment.
Hey, to go back to the CPC thing, I know you're on that committee for the lease and everything. Are we gonna end up, long story short, are we gonna end up having to place these windows ourselves? Is this group gonna?
Well, I mean, the FinCom, our group has said no. I've been asked, basically, if they moved it over to the historic preservation category, would it get approved? Which I don't think, we haven't entertained that, and I haven't officially been asked that, but.
I just mean that whatever's going on over there with that lease and everything, and the upkeep of the building is probably, we're responsible for the building in the end, so instead of taking it out of the general fund.
Well, we're not responsible for the building. I mean, in the end, it's
Well,
like
if that company goes bankrupt
2056.
and they disappear, we're still responsible for the building.
Yeah,
I
but then we
suppose
get it
we would,
back.
yeah, we would get
And then we
ownership
have to
of it.
fix the windows and the money comes out of the general
Well,
fund.
no,
instead of
we'd
matching.
find a new operator who would pay more than $1 a year, and they would keep up the building.
But meanwhile, he's not gonna take over the building with rotted windows.
Why not? The building was in much worse shape. That's why we got into this lease in the
Okay.
first place. It was in much worse shape, so we gave it to them for 50 years for $50, or I think it was 75 years for $75, with the understanding that they would keep up the building. They haven't done it. I think it's high time we find somebody else who would.
Yeah, okay. I'm
And
just
they'll
saying
pay
if-
more than $1, maybe $100.
Yeah, if that works, then that's great.
Go back to
If you don't, someone's gonna have to fix the windows.
All right,
I'm going to actually move backwards. I skipped over one that I wanted to talk about briefly. It's on page 12. It's Article 28. It's called the Establishment of an Appropriation for Stabilization Fund for the Airport. What the airport is actually going to ask you to do is, under Chapter 40, Section 5B, Paragraph 2, you can create what's known as Special Purpose Stabilization Funds. And when you create them, you have to designate what the purpose is for. So what the airport is attempting to do, or would like to do, is create a special purpose stabilization fund to be used to fund future payment of accrued liabilities for compensated absences for people that retire or leave employment. And so they would like to, with this article and the motion, not only recommend the adoption of that and creation of it, but they will be looking to fund some portion of that. It's a rather large liability, so they're not going to fund it all at once. But they have people that are nearing retirement or could retire at any point, and so this is a way for them to slowly begin to build that up, a fund up to cover that at some point in the future, and without putting a continuous strain on the budget, because what they would be using is they would be recommending, I believe, based on my discussions, there's a surplus in the fuel revolver that they normally transfer into their operating budget, and they would more than likely transfer some of it into here to begin funding this program here. This is something that I think that next year you'll see the town advance. I don't know if we'll actually fund it immediately, given the substantially larger number for the town than the airport, but it's probably something that I will recommend that we ask to do at next year's town meeting as
So
well.
they want to save money for future payroll costs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a substantial amount of payouts in terms of retirement when you leave for your sick leave. It's retirement. It's your accrued benefits when you, whether you leave employment via just moving off island and leaving or retiring, you get your accrued leave paid out.
And they didn't save this money before.
Nobody
There's been
really
no
does.
There's really been no mechanism to
Right.
do it. I mean, this is good practice to
Yeah.
build an accrual for this.
And I take it that with the employees, there was no cap on the amount of vacation or sick days?
There are caps on it, yes, but it's still, if you think you're accruing it in 1 year and then paying it out in 10 years later, or whatever the number of years are, depending on what the benefit, the accrued time is, you're paying it out typically at a substantially higher rate than you put it in at.
When you start saving.
Right, so this is a way for them to begin doing that without putting a lot of pressure on their operating budget and having to anticipate this. Now, the one caveat to this, which I've explained to them, and my hope is eventually when they have to tap it, that town meeting supports it, is money going into this stabilization fund goes in at a majority, but coming out, it takes 2/3 majority to get the money out. So,
Does it affect our percentage for the other stabilization funds?
no, it does not.
Do you know how much they'll be asking for?
I don't. I've given them a recommendation on roughly what they should ask, but based on what their discussions with them have been, but I don't know what the airport commissioner, the commission through the town, the airport manager is going to recommend for it yet, as of yet.
We'll know a week
It'll
from
be
today.
substantial, though.
$1 million.
No, not that substantial. I don't want to do zoning because I'm not really good at it, so.
We don't want to hear about it.
Good. So page 51, Article 76, which is probably going to get an awful lot of questions and discussion. Which, if you read the Inquirer and Mirror today, you would have seen the article in the paper about what's known as district improvement financing.
Oh, this is the dip.
This is the DIF. The DIF is kind of a unique, it's a unique financing tool that exists. It hasn't been used relatively too often in Massachusetts. It is a way to designate a specific development area. And when you designate that specific development area and you create a plan in that development area, you freeze the valuations as a baseline in that area. And that baseline freeze, that money flows to the general fund. This money, then what happens is this district improvement financing area, any incremental changes in assessed value, which is then correlated into a new growth calculation, that money is used to pay for infrastructure improvements within that defined area. The area that is being proposed right now is all within all around the Richmond development and the Old South Quarter, which there's substantial amount of infrastructure improvements, I think in the neighborhood of about $10 million that are going to have to be done to reconfigure the area to handle the increased traffic along the way. So what happens is that this allows us to borrow a little bit differently. It allows us to finance it slightly differently. One of the things that it does do is it segregates money within Proposition 2.5 specifically to cover this debt service and doesn't make it available to cover any of the other potential, for lack of a better term, I guess, unintended consequences of development. I don't know what the exact term I'm looking for is, but I guess we can go with that one. This article doesn't require the town to do it. It only would give us the authority to hold the public hearings and to move forward and potentially do it. There's some questions. I know that there's a couple comments in the paper. Typically, these things are reserved for communities that have no access to the bond market. It makes it easier. I can tell you from my experience in the refinancing and all the debt that we've done in the sales, the recent sales, we really have no problem going to market to sell our bonds. However, to do that outside of this would then require either a debt exclusion or to fund it within Proposition 2.5 solely that way. So it's something that the planning board and I, the planning director and I have talked about. I think that it is worthwhile to at least put it on the warrant, have the discussion, and continue the process of vetting whether or not it makes sense as a development tool in this area. So that's what this article would seek to do.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
about this?
Sure.
I think there's been some discussion that one of the reasons you maybe do this is it makes you eligible for some grant money as well.
It could potentially
Do we
make
have
you.
any more clarity on that as to if it really does or what the magnitude?
We're working on that to
'Cause
find
that
out.
seems to be
Yeah.
one of the real, sort of, the discussion happens back, from what I've watched, right? A
Yeah.
lot of the discussion happens back and forth, everyone throws up their hands, and then someone says, yeah, but you get grant money.
I know that it's, to what extent it will provide additional leverage for grant money, I'm not entirely sure. I know that in a lot of grants, there's certain checkoff boxes that give you more, in the weighting of the grant, more higher weighting for having certain things. How much impact this will have, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not intimately involved in all the grant writing, so, I think either the transportation planner who does a lot of the grants or Andrew would know more what their thoughts are on how it would help us with those grants.
And then to the extent that this is really just asking for authorization to have why do we, is that as a common procedural thing that we have?
It is, yes. The town meeting has to adopt this, and then there's whole steps to continue, or has to give us the authority to do this. And then there's public hearings that have to be held, and there's a plan that has to be built around what the infrastructure improvements are and what the financing is.
The
Yeah.
authorization from town meeting
Yes.
first to kick
Yes.
off that process.
If we didn't do it,
Yep.
we would still have to pay for all this infrastructure.
We would have to do it anyway, and more than likely, the way we would do it would be through just my recommendation would be a debt exclusion to cover it, because it could be substantial.
And it ends in 30 years.
It is allowed for a maximum of 30 years. If we did this, even though this debt does not count against any of our debt limits, if we had the district improvement financing, we still have a debt policy that requires 50 to 65% of our debt to be amortized within 10 years. So depending on what the change would look like in terms of the increased valuation and the additional money that comes in, I'm not entirely sure that this would last for 30 years, because I want to get the debt paid off as fast as possible. That way, the money would then be flowing back to be used for anything in the general fund.
So unlike a sewer or something like that, we'd get the money in, and we could pay off the balance if we wanted to right away.
Well, if we borrow the money, we can't pay the balance off right away, but I would be able to shorten the amortization schedule so that I could fund it faster and get it paid off. Okay, so then let's see, page 54, Article 78. I'm sure that probably everybody is familiar with the revolving accounts. It typically was always Article 4, but the Municipal Modernization Act actually made revolving funds easier to deal with. And what they've done is Article 78 is a change to the general bylaws by adding these new sections which The first one, 19-21, would establish these revolving funds permanently, and they would not need to be reauthorized at every town meeting. The only thing that would happen at town meeting, which is 19-22, is that the requirement would still be that town meeting would set the annual expenditure, the limitation on spending every year on the revolving funds, rather than the reauthorization. These revolving funds that we accept here, if they were not reauthorized, then any fund balance automatically goes to the general fund. So the legislature said it doesn't make sense to have to do this all the time, so we're going to change this. And now Article 78 would fix that by establishing these as revolving funds and then requiring town meeting to set the annual limitation on the expenditures, which we subsequently have done this here in Article 79. Article 80, another Municipal Modernization Act bill, is a local option tax on the sale of recreational marijuana. Adoption of this would allow us to collect a local sales tax in the amount of 2% on the sale or transfer of marijuana or marijuana products by a local retailer, operating within the town.
Is 2% set by somebody else? I mean, why not more?
I think it might actually be set in the bill. I have to look. I didn't delve into the recreational marijuana one too much, but I will look at
I mean,
it.
it seems like a good way to make some money.
Yes.
How does, not to get into politics, seeing it's still against the law federally, where do we stand as a town? How does that mumble jumble all come together?
I don't know.
I only know one thing, it can't come across the water. So whatever's gonna happen here, they gotta grow it here. Because if it goes across the water, it's federal.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Article
It's
80.
good cultivation land on the island.
You're allowed to grow 10 plants yourself.
Oh, boy.
But you can't sell it to anyone, you can only give it away.
Okay.
Article 81 is also out of the Municipal Modernization Bill. It actually deals with licenses and permits for delinquent taxpayers. The old bylaw required the collector to provide the delinquent taxpayer list to departments and agencies within the town that issue permits only annually. Municipal Modernization Act allows us to provide it periodically in a more expeditious fashion rather than once a year. So by accepting this will give us the ability to provide it, say, on a monthly basis or whatever, to the departments that are issuing licenses. Article 82 is another Municipal Modernization Act. It allows us to set local speed limits. Article 83 is the amendments to the OPEB trust fund under Chapter 32B, Section 20. We had originally accepted this actually prior to my arrival here. We had created the OPEB trust fund, which we fund with $500,000 every year for the other post-employment benefits. There's been a lot of questions whether it was actually a qualified trust, which would enable us to actually use the money in it to count towards our OPEB funding and get a better discount rate. And there was a lot of questions about whether or not it could be used for any other purposes. So effective as of November 7th, the legislature, through the Municipal Modernization Act, changed the law so that it is a qualified trust and can only be used for OPEB purposes, which will allow us to now count it in terms of discount rate and the funding status. So in order to be able to take advantage of that, we need to now accept the amendments to that statute.
Can you go back to the speed limit one? The state sets a speed limit, so we're asking them to let us set the speed limit, or they're letting us under some new legislation?
We're actually voting to accept the provisions of the general laws that would authorize the Board of Selectmen to establish speed limits inside any thickly settled or business district areas in town.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything else actually after that, David, to be honest with you. It's all home rule petitions.
Sylvia Howard.
Is what?
Sylvia Howard.
I'm interested.
Isn't that, I think that that was the land way back here. The land acquisition on page,
Oh, okay.
I think that's real property acquisition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But Libby, the town manager, said she would discuss that
Okay.
when she comes at the next
Right.
meeting. When she comes in that, okay.
Okay. Here we go. So we have a few of these to ponder. A lot of them are, I think, pretty pro forma. So, anybody got anything else? So next week, Thursday, between Thursday and Saturday, and I know you're not going to be here for Saturday.
Neither Thursday,
Saturday.
Saturday, or the following Monday.
Okay. Anybody else not going to be here on Saturday, the 28th?
I'm probably not be, it's the 28th.
Yeah. Going to miss the most fun day of the year.
So now we're down 2.
We're down 2. So,
Nobody gets sick.
yeah.
Excuse me.
I have just a question about the school budget. Why, and this is just because I'm new, right? Why don't they include the health insurance benefits and debt service in the school budget?
That's actually a good question, which I know Brian will have an answer for.
Next time.
Go for it, Frank.
Because it's a good question.
I think it's more of a moot point because they're just all town employees.
I mean,
Just
they-
goes back to the general fund anyway.
So I just come in Lennox, all the health benefits and all the debt service for the school were part of the school budget, because then you were looking at a budget that was completely inclusive
No.
of every expense, and then you were able to compare that budget to the whole town budget. And I feel like we're not comparing the school budget to the
Well,
town's budget.
I mean, it does get I guess the state does take it into account because the net pupil costs that they reflected, that 20,000 includes allocations for health insurance and for debt service in it, because they have to report it as part of their net school spending number.
So the per pupil number
Yeah, it does-
includes it,
it
but the
yeah.
overall budget doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, we, probably because, well, philosophically, there's a couple of reasons why I wouldn't do it, but I don't want to,
It's okay, I was just
and
curious.
philosophically, because of the way that schools are a separate spending authority, it's always been a way to, if there's substantial amount of money left over in that line item, with the way that their budget is allocated, you can spend it for anything. So keeping it within the general fund, within the benefit side, basically allows that money to flow back to free cash if it's not used. Debt service, I would say, because it's an obligation of the entire town, it doesn't make sense to put it directly into a school budget, because it's, it has to be paid regardless. So I wouldn't want to, not that it's happened here, but you wouldn't want to open up to the vagaries of town meeting on terms of debt service and arguing over these costs in a school budget when the town's already signed up for 30 years of debt for a building or something.
I get that part more than I get the health insurance costs. Second question, and this is, again, coming from the mainland and not an island, what about school choice? No one ever school choices into Nantucket.
That's true, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure. I have to look at the chair sheet. I don't think they do.
For the school choice.
School choice is that if you live in a neighboring community and you like Nantucket schools better, you can school choice into that community, and your community has to pay Nantucket the per pupil cost.
Like charter schools or something like that.
So
Who
there's
pays the
no-
transportation?
I suppose we would.
I don't
We
know.
pay
No,
the
they would.
transportation.
The
The other
people
district,
running it.
Maybe they can go around the boat more.
I'm just curious.
our labor force does it. It could work.
David, on the school budget, over the last 5 years, how well have they managed their school budget, and how much money has flowed back, hopefully some has, to the general fund?
Very little.
Well, nothing goes back to the general fund.
Well, it would flow back to free cash
Free cash.
if they
Yeah,
didn't
but
spend the
they-
entire
well,
appropriation.
But I
But
think
They
what
can
they
find
told you
ways
was
within
that
their own
they
budget.
transferred it all inside their,
and you have
They
to,
just-
you have
They
to.
just move it around,
Yeah,
so
the school has.
they break even at the end of the year? Is that what they're saying?
Pardon me.
They move the cash around, so at the end of the year, essentially, they have a break-even budget.
Or somewhere. I'd have to look. I don't remember what they returned. They did return some money last year. Schools have, under Department of Education guidelines, we only vote a lump sum number, and the school committee and the superintendent have the ability to move it within those structurally, however they deem fit to spend. I can tell you my own personal experience in doing this for almost 10 years now is that most schools spend almost every penny that they're allocated. So I'll get the number because I do remember that last year they did return some money to back, which would have flowed into free cash. They do a good job. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like the schools just spend the
Right.
money, but they
Right.
certainly do a good job. And they have, as the superintendent identified, have some unknowns, especially around special ed, which they need that flexibility to be able to move money and transfer it and do that, so.
Well, the reason I'm asking the question is that in their goals and objectives for the year, they wanted more accurate budgeting. So that sort of raised the question, what's happened in the past?
And if we, or this is really a question for you guys, because again, being new, if we wanted to recommend, to your point, that they get another English language teacher, they fund another English language teacher, can we do that? Or that should have happened before?
It's the school, yeah. I mean, we really have no power over any of, I mean, it's courtesy that they're here. They didn't want to come.
They didn't really want to go.
Pardon
No,
me?
if they didn't want to.
If they didn't want to come, they didn't have to show up.
Right.
So, because we have no power over it's totally the school board's.
That's why it's set up that way, so the town doesn't try to steal the school's money.
money.
Well, I mean,
Should I say it that way?
I'm just shocked at how little their budget has grown over the years. I mean, from 2008 to 2015, the enrollment's grown almost 20%.
But what you may be seeing here is that they've spread out their overhead over more pupils, okay? So, I mean, the assumption is that there's a linear relationship with pupils and students, but I think it's not quite linear. I think if you went back, you'd see more overhead 10 years ago. They've added students, they haven't had to add, they've added instructional costs, but they haven't had to add the overhead to support it.
Their fixed costs stay the same.
Yeah.
no
I mean, they've
matter
gone
how
up.
much they add.
I'm just saying in that period, we've seen the cost per student go down where the rest of the state's gone up 20%. I mean, that's extraordinary. I don't know that, is there another area of our budget, of our town, where they've been able to do that, where costs have gone down per person served?
I think you may be also looking at a management team that's probably a little stronger than it was.
It could be, but, I asked the question a few times. I mean, what is the deliverable that we're looking for out of any service? We're looking for lives saved, maybe for the fire department. What are we getting from the school? Are we really budget conscious and not getting better results? I mean, the headlines in the newspaper aren't great.
Well, I as a mom with two kids in the elementary school, and to your point, I think that there could be additional help with the multinational students who are in these classes, especially when you look at the ratio of half the class being multinational, right? They could use more help. Anyway,
And I hope the two private schools are in good financial shape, because that's 300 students that
Yeah, well,
we're not paying to educate as a community.
they could use help also. I'll just say that. At least one of them could use a lot of help.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask that question, and that's, to me, that's a should be the back of our mind question, because that would put a big impact on.
So, yeah, I mean, we don't even rank within the top 100 schools. So,
Yeah.
everyone's clear on that?
that's what I'm saying.
Disgrace.
I think we could do better.
I mean, it just is someone who's going to have kids, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Well, I got 3 kids at the school, and we're very happy with the school, having come from some excellent
Yeah,
schools.
I mean, I'm class of
I'm not
03.
sure that's a problem. You buy your way out of getting to a top 100 school based on test scores, given the environment we're in.
I went to high school here. I'm not trying to knock the school system, but I'm certainly not going to paint a pretty picture either. So.
Almost. Well, before we go and adjourn, just one other thing. I've spoken with Stephen and a couple of others about our process on Saturday, and that's why I was asking if you were going to be here. What I'd like to do, if you all are amenable, is that we've got a schedule of what times different departments are going to be here. Like to have 2 people per group, and what we are talking about doing is putting somebody who's been on the finance committee for a while with some new folks to just walk through that. You would become responsible for really understanding what's in the presentation packet, which is more than just some financial numbers, and leading our discussion, and so that we are focused rather than us all sort of chiming in a sort of somewhat scattered fashion. Are you all up for that?
Yeah.
So, you sure you don't want to come, Cliff?
Yeah, you know, I've been asking this question for a couple of weeks and running around. I thought we would do it this weekend instead of next weekend.
So what we have, just, and I'll send this out, but just to give sort of a quick lineup. Police, Harbor Master, and Emergency Preparedness, 8:30 to 9:15. We're talking about having Joe and Chris do that. Fire, Stephen and Henry, from 9:15 to 9:45. Our Island Home, Cliff, you want to phone it in? Joanna? I don't think you can, I just,
Well, I
but
could
we're
do
going to
something
have
ahead
to,
of time, seeing it's such a scattered situation.
well, this is operating budget now, so we're not going to be talking about their capital
Situation.
budget. That we'll deal with that specifically at another time. This is just straight operations. So if you saw, Rachel last night, that's kind of what you're going to get, which is she'll,
It's not much, it's usually
It's
the
not
same
much,
old
yeah.
story.
DPW, Joe and Joanna. Solid Waste, Cliff, we were going to have you do that with Peter McEachern. Sewer Enterprise Fund, I was going to do it with you, Chris.
Sure.
And then Peter and I would do the general fund if there's any remaining discussion. So I'm going to tweak this a little bit because you're not going to be here, but is there any area that anybody has a particular affinity for that they'd like to sign up for? Or is this good? Okay, so we
Sign
need,
away.
okay. Thank you all very much. A little bit of an experiment. We've not done it this way before, but I think it's my hope that it helps new folks understand.
I presume we should expect that the departments, these budget presentations are either done or we'll get them someday next week, so that.
Tomorrow?
2 or 3 days to.
We are working as
Diligent?
feverishly and as diligently as possible to get all of the enterprise fund budgets and the information for Thursday to you by tomorrow, so you'll have the weekend to do it. There's at least one general fund department that we still have to meet with. We have to meet with DPW. We were supposed to do it today, but given the fact that we had to do the warrant, we had to. Everything else we are going to be working on over the weekend with the goal to try to get it to you by Monday at the absolute latest, if that's okay with everybody. It's an awful lot to put it all together and get it reviewed quickly, so.
So I think that, so we'll have the information ahead of time. So given how hard these guys are working, I would just ask that you respect the fact that they've worked hard, that we spend the time to go through it and be prepared. And for the 2 lead people, that will be your responsibility, so, and that's not,
There's no issue with the 2 of us talking, we know what the meeting stuff, right, as long as it's just 2 people
yeah,
preparing together.
yeah.
And we're trying to put it in as clear, as concise a format, especially since we have the exception rule. The first page has exceptions on it, so everybody knows where to focus and everything, to try to make it as easy as possible. Obviously, for all of you, we make this as efficient as we can.
So you're gonna see what their plans were, what they've accomplished. You're gonna see a page on exceptions, so it'll be right up there. You will see financial information that will be there, but remember the goal is to focus on the exceptions. And there are some broader exceptions that will apply to everybody. Health insurance is a good example. So we don't have to ping everybody on health insurance. That'll be identified up front. And in our general fund discussion at the end, that's where we should have a discussion about what are we gonna, and I'm assuming that health insurance numbers are up, what are we?
8.5%.
Okay. Is there some longer-term plan to move people off of Master Medical and all of those kinds of things? So things that cover all the departments we'll take care of at the end, so we don't have to ask everybody, so.
Even the insurance thing always comes down to negotiation. Seems to be
Yeah.
another one of those deals to be achieved.
And then Thursday we'll have our first of our enterprise, so it's Wanacomit, it's the airport, and Sconset, and county. So, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time and attention.